In a quiet town where the courthouse stood tall and proud, Judge Richard Langley was a name everyone knew. He was the kind of man who commanded respect, or at least obedience. His sharp eyes and stern voice could silence a crowded courtroom in seconds. People whispered about how strict he was, but most believed that his tough approach kept the town safe. After all, wasn't justice supposed to be harsh on criminals? What no one realized, though, was that behind the polished wooden bench where Langley sat, there was a darker side to his story. Pam Bondi had always been different from the others in the legal world. While many lawyers were content to follow rules and avoid rocking the boat, Bondi had a fire in her belly. She didn't just want to win cases, she wanted to make sure the truth came out. That's why when she noticed something odd about a series of court decisions, she couldn't let it go. It started with a single case, a wealthy businessman accused of embezzling millions. Despite mountains of evidence against him, the man walked free after Langley dismissed key witnesses and threw out critical documents. At first, Bondi thought it might have been a mistake, but then it happened again and again. Each time the pattern was the same: rich defendants, questionable rulings, and outcomes that seemed too convenient. Bondi began keeping track, jotting down notes late at night when her office was empty. She reviewed old case files, cross-referencing dates, names, and verdicts. Slowly, a disturbing picture emerged. It wasn't random or coincidental. It was deliberate. Someone was pulling strings, and Bondi was certain it was Judge Langley. The more she dug, the angrier she became. How could someone entrusted with upholding the law betray it so completely? But taking on a judge wasn't easy, especially one as powerful as Langley. He had connections everywhere: lawyers, politicians, even members of the police force. Bondi knew she had to tread carefully. If anyone found out what she was doing, she'd face consequences far worse than losing her job. Still, she couldn't ignore what she'd uncovered. Every day she told herself she was doing the right thing. Justice wasn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It was about making sure the system itself stayed fair and honest. One evening, while going through yet another file, Bondi stumbled upon something that sent chills down her spine. A handwritten note, tucked away in the corner of a folder, mentioned a large sum of money transferred to an offshore account. The timing matched perfectly with one of Langley's controversial rulings. Bondi's heart raced as she pieced things together. This wasn't just corruption, it was organized. Someone was paying Langley to twist the law for their benefit. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. She wasn't dealing with a lone bad actor, this was part of a much bigger scheme. Bond decided she needed help. She reached out to a few trusted colleagues, sharing bits and pieces of what she'd discovered. Some listened intently, nodding in agreement. Others warned her to stop before she got herself into trouble. "You're playing with fire," one of them said. "Langley isn't someone you want to cross." Bondi appreciated their concern, but she couldn't turn back now. The deeper she went, the clearer it became that exposing Langley wasn't just important, it was necessary. If she didn't act, who would? As weeks turned into months, Bondi's investigation grew more dangerous. She started noticing strange things happening around her. Her car wouldn't start one morning, only to mysteriously work fine the next. Files she left on her desk disappeared overnight, only to reappear days later in the wrong order. Once, she thought she saw someone watching her outside her apartment building. Whether it was paranoia or real danger, Bondi couldn't tell. But one thing was certain: she wasn't imagining the pressure mounting against her. Despite the risks, Bondi refused to give up. She spent long nights poring over documents, connecting dots, and building a case strong enough to bring Langley down. She knew she couldn't do it alone, but finding allies was tricky. Most people were too afraid to speak out. Those who weren't scared were either too busy protecting their own interests or simply didn't care enough to get involved. Bondi often felt isolated, like she was fighting a battle no one else understood. Yet every time doubt crept in, she reminded herself why she started this journey in the first place. The turning point came when Bondi uncovered a bombshell: recordings of private conversations between Langley and some of his associates. Hidden Deep within an old server, these audio files revealed everything: bribes, threats, cover-ups. Hearing Langley's voice, cold and calculating, talking about how he manipulated trials, made Bondi's blood boil. This was the proof she needed. With trembling hands, she copied the files onto a secure drive, knowing they could change everything. But having the evidence wasn't enough. Bondi needed a way to share it without putting herself in even greater danger. She thought about going straight to the media, but feared retaliation before the story could break. Instead, she decided to reach out to someone she trusted implicitly, a journalist named Mark Harris. Harris had a reputation for being fearless and thorough, qualities Bondi admired. More importantly, he hated corruption almost as much as she did. When she finally met him in secret, handing over the drive, she felt a mix of relief and terror. Relief because she was no longer carrying the burden alone, and terror because she knew what might come next. Little did Bondi know, her decision to trust Harris would set off a chain reaction neither of them could have predicted. As Harris began verifying the information, news of Bondi's investigation leaked. Suddenly, her life became a whirlwind of accusations, threats, and fear. Langley, realizing he was being targeted, struck back with everything he had. Fabricated charges were filed against Bondi, painting her as a dishonest prosecutor seeking revenge. Friends distanced themselves, colleagues doubted her, and her once stellar career hung by a thread. For the first time, Bondi questioned whether she'd made the right choice. Yet even in her darkest moments, Bondi held on to hope. She reminded herself that the truth was on her side. No matter how hard Langley tried to bury it, the facts would eventually surface. And when they did, the entire town, and maybe the nation, would see the corrupt judge for who he truly was. Until then, Bondi vowed to keep fighting, no matter the cost. The moment Pam Bondi handed over the evidence to Mark Harris, her world began to crumble. It wasn't long before whispers of her investigation reached Judge Langley's ears. At first, he dismissed them as harmless rumors, confident that no one could touch him. After all, he had spent years building a fortress around himself, layers of influence, loyalty, and fear that kept his secrets safe. But as the whispers grew louder, Langley started to feel uneasy. He knew Bondi was trouble the moment she began, asking too many questions. Now, with concrete evidence floating around, he realized he had underestimated her. Langley didn't become a judge by leaving things to chance. He was a man who thrived on control, and when control slipped from his grasp, he acted swiftly and ruthlessly. Sitting in his dimly lit study late one night, he made a phone call. On the other end was Victor Kane, a slick lawyer who owed Langley more than one favor. "We have a problem," Langley said, his voice low but sharp. "Bondi's sticking. Her nose where it doesn't belong. I need you to handle it." Kane listened carefully, nodding even though Langley couldn't see him. By the time the call ended, a plan was already forming. The next day, Bondi arrived at work to find her office in disarray. Files were scattered across the floor, drawers were pulled out, and her computer screen displayed an error message she couldn't fix. At first, she thought it was just a clumsy break-in, but something felt off. Nothing valuable had been taken. Not her wallet, not her purse, not even the petty cash jar sitting on her desk. Instead, it seemed like someone had been searching for something specific. Her stomach sank as she realized what they might have been looking for: the backup copies of the evidence she'd gathered against Langley. Bondi tried to stay calm, but paranoia crept in. She double-checked every lock on her doors, scanned the parking lot for unfamiliar cars, and jumped at every unexpected sound. Despite her efforts to act normal, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. One afternoon, while grabbing coffee at a nearby cafe, she noticed a man sitting 2 tables away. He wasn't doing anything suspicious, just sipping his drink and scrolling through his phone. But something about him felt wrong. When their eyes met briefly, Bondi quickly looked away, her heart pounding. Was it her imagination, or was he following her? Meanwhile, Langley and Kane worked behind the scenes to discredit Bondi before she could strike. They crafted a narrative that painted her as unstable and power-hungry, someone who fabricated evidence to settle personal scores. To make matters worse, they planted false documents suggesting Bondi had tampered with case files and misled witnesses. These accusations spread like wildfire, fueled by anonymous tips to local reporters and carefully timed leaks to social media. Within days, Bondi's reputation was in tatters. People who once respected her now questioned her motives. Even her closest friends hesitated to defend her publicly, fearing guilt by association. As the attacks intensified, Bondi found herself fighting on two fronts, proving her innocence and protecting the evidence she still had. She reached out to Harris again, urging him to publish the story sooner rather than later. "If we wait too long, they'll destroy everything," she told him during a hurried meeting in a deserted park. Harris nodded grimly, understanding the stakes. But publishing prematurely carried its own risks. If the public doubted the authenticity of the evidence, or if Langley managed to discredit it, the entire investigation would collapse. Desperate for support, Bondi turned to her family. Her parents, both retired teachers, listened quietly as she explained what was happening. They didn't fully understand the legal intricacies, but they saw the toll it was taking on her. Dark circles shadowed her eyes and her hands trembled as she spoke. Her mother hugged her tightly, whispering, "We're here for you, no matter what." For the first time in weeks, Bondi allowed herself to cry. The weight of the battle she was fighting pressed down on her, threatening to crush her spirit. Yet, even in her weakest moments, she refused to surrender. Back in his courtroom, Langley played the part of the impartial judge perfectly. He presided over cases with his usual sternness, barking orders and maintaining order. To anyone watching, he appeared untouchable. But beneath his polished exterior, cracks were beginning to show. He snapped at clerks over minor mistakes, canceled hearings without explanation, and avoided eye contact with colleagues. Those closest to him noticed the change, though none dared to ask questions. Langley's paranoia mirrored Bondi's. He too suspected he was being watched. One evening, unable to sleep, Langley scrolled through news articles about Bondi. The headlines mocked her, calling her a liar and a fraud. Comment sections were filled with insults and conspiracy theories. For a brief moment, he felt triumphant. His plan was working. Bondi was losing credibility, and soon she'd be nothing more than a cautionary tale. But then he stumbled upon a comment that stopped him cold. Someone had written, "What if she's telling the truth?" Langley stared at the screen, his chest tightening. That single sentence reminded him of the fragility of his empire. All it took was one person questioning the narrative for the entire facade to crumble. While Langley fretted, Bondi and Harris continued their fight. They decided to take a bold step, releasing small snippets of the evidence to trusted journalists across the country. Each piece was carefully chosen to raise questions without giving away the full story. The strategy worked. Reporters began digging into Langley's past, uncovering inconsistencies and red flags that had gone unnoticed for years. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn. Public opinion shifted from skepticism toward curiosity. People wanted answers, and they wanted them fast. But Langley wasn't ready to give up. Using his remaining allies, he filed official charges against Bondi, accusing her of professional misconduct and obstruction of justice. The move shocked everyone, including Bondi herself. Facing the possibility of imprisonment, she was placed under house arrest pending trial. The irony wasn't lost on her. A prosecutor accused of crimes she never committed, all because she tried to expose the real criminal. As she sat alone in her living room, staring at the ankle monitor strapped to her leg, Bondi allowed herself a rare moment of self-pity. Then, steeling herself, she picked up her phone and dialed Harris. "We can't stop now," she said firmly. "If anything, this makes our fight even more important." Harris agreed, promising to keep pushing forward. Together, they devised a new plan. While Bondi remained under house arrest, Harris would work tirelessly to verify and publish the remaining evidence. They also reached out to federal investigators, hoping to bring in outside authorities who wouldn't be swayed by Langley's influence. It was a risky gamble, but Bondi believed it was their best shot at justice. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the town reached a breaking point. Supporters of Bondi held rallies demanding transparency and accountability. Critics called her reckless, and accused her of dragging the legal system through the mud. Meanwhile, Langley clung to his position, lashing out at anyone who dared question him. Behind closed doors, however, his confidence wavered. He knew the walls were closing in, and there was little he could do to stop it. In the midst of the chaos, Bondi received a message from an unexpected source, a former clerk who had worked closely with Langley. The clerk claimed to have additional evidence that could seal the case against him. Bondi's heart raced as she arranged a secret meeting. When they finally met in a quiet corner of a library, the clerk handed over a folder thick with incriminating documents. "I've seen enough," the clerk whispered, tears welling up in their eyes. "I can't live with myself knowing I helped him." With this new evidence, Bondi felt a flicker of hope. She passed it along to Harris, who immediately began verifying its authenticity. Every page confirmed what Bondi had suspected all along. Langley's corruption ran deeper than anyone imagined. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place, and Bondi knew the endgame was near. Whether it would lead to victory or defeat remained uncertain, but one thing was clear: the truth was closer than ever to seeing the light of day. As the evidence against Judge Richard Langley mounted, the tension in the small town grew unbearable. Pam Bondi, still under house arrest, spent her days strategizing with Mark Harris over encrypted phone calls. They knew they were running out of time. Langley's allies were working overtime to discredit the new wave of allegations, spreading doubt wherever they could. But Bondi and Harris weren't about to back down. With every document the clerk had provided, their case became stronger and more dangerous. The clerk's folder contained explosive details: bank statements showing suspicious transfers, emails outlining bribes disguised as campaign donations, and even handwritten notes from Langley himself detailing how certain cases should be handled. One note stood out, a single sentence scrawled on a piece of hotel stationery: "Make sure this one disappears." It was chillingly vague, yet unmistakably sinister. Bondi stared at it for hours, imagining the lives ruined or destroyed because of those words. She felt anger burning inside her, but also resolve. If Langley thought he could silence people forever, he was wrong. Harris worked around the clock to verify the authenticity of each document. He contacted forensic experts, financial analysts, and cybersecurity specialists, leaving no stone unturned. Every confirmation brought them closer to exposing Langley, but it also made Bondi's situation more precarious. The judge wasn't just fighting back. He was lashing out with everything he had. His lawyers filed motions to block any further publication of the evidence, claiming it violated his rights. Meanwhile, anonymous threats flooded Bondi's voicemail and email inbox. Some warned her to stop digging, while others went as far as threatening harm to her family. Bondi tried to stay focused, but the pressure was relentless. Her parents, hearing about the threats, begged her to drop the investigation. "You've done enough," her father said during a tearful phone call. "Let someone else handle it." Bondi wanted to agree, to step away, disappear for a while, and let life return to normal. But she couldn't. Not when she knew how many others had suffered because of Langley's corruption. Each night she reminded herself why she started this fight in the first place. Justice wasn't just an idea, it was something worth sacrificing for. While Bondi grappled with fear and determination, Langley's world began to unravel. His once unshakable confidence faltered as cracks appeared in his carefully constructed empire. Reporters hounded him outside the courthouse, shouting questions about the allegations. Colleagues avoided him in hallways, pretending not to notice his presence. Even his closest friends started distancing themselves, sensing the inevitable fall. Langley responded by doubling down on his defenses, hiring high-profile attorneys and issuing public statements denying all wrongdoing. But the more he protested, the guiltier he seemed. One evening, as Langley sat alone in his study, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and stared blankly at the wall. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to think about what might happen if Bondi succeeded. Would he lose everything? His reputation, his career, his freedom? The thought terrified him. Yet, deep down, He knew he'd brought this upon himself. Every bribe accepted, every verdict manipulated, every lie told, it all led to this moment. He drained the glass in one gulp and reached for the bottle again, trying to drown the rising panic. Meanwhile, federal investigators finally stepped in. Tipped off by Harris, they launched a formal probe into Langley's activities. Agents descended on the courthouse, seizing records and interviewing staff members. The sudden arrival of federal law enforcement sent shockwaves through the community. People whispered about raids, arrests, and indictments. Some cheered quietly, hoping justice would finally prevail. Others worried about the fallout, fearing the scandal would tarnish the entire legal system. For Bondi, the federal involvement marked a turning point. She met with agents multiple times, providing detailed accounts of her findings and answering their endless questions. At first, she was nervous. What if they didn't believe her? What if Langley somehow managed to twist the narrative again? But the agents listened intently, their expressions growing darker with each revelation. By the end of their meetings, Bondi felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the tide was truly turning. Langley, however, refused to go down without a fight. He launched a counterattack, accusing Bondi and Harris of orchestrating a smear campaign to ruin his career. In dramatic press conferences, he portrayed himself as a victim of jealousy and political vendettas. "They're trying to destroy me because I enforce the law fairly," he declared, pointing fingers at invisible enemies. His performance was convincing, at least to some. Supporters rallied behind him, dismissing the allegations as baseless attacks. But for every person who defended him, another questioned his motives. The battle between Bondi and Langley spilled into the media, dominating headlines and talk shows. Journalists debated whether Bondi was a hero or a villain, while pundits speculated about Langley's fate. Social media exploded with hashtags like calling justice for Pam and free Bondi, drawing attention from across the country. Supporters organized marches carrying signs that read "Truth matters" and "Corruption has no place in court." Critics countered with accusations of witch hunts and character assassinations. The divide grew wider with each passing day. Amid the chaos, Bondi found unexpected strength in the support she received. Strangers sent messages of encouragement, sharing stories of their own experiences with corruption and injustice. Lawyers offered pro bono assistance, helping her prepare for the upcoming trial. Even former colleagues who had initially doubted her began reaching out, apologizing for not standing by her sooner. Bondi realized she wasn't alone anymore. A movement was building, one fueled by ordinary people demanding accountability. Behind the scenes, Harris worked tirelessly to ensure the story stayed in the spotlight. He collaborated with national news outlets, releasing exclusive reports that kept the pressure on Langley. Each article added fuel to the fire, forcing authorities to act. Public outrage reached a fever pitch when Harris published excerpts from the clerk's documents revealing specific instances of bribery and manipulation. Readers were shocked by the extent of Langley's corruption, and calls for his removal grew louder. Langley, sensing the walls closing in, made one last desperate attempt to regain control. He filed a lawsuit against Bondi, Harris, and several journalists, accusing them of defamation and conspiracy. The move backfired spectacularly. Instead of intimidating his opponents, it galvanized them. Legal experts dismissed the lawsuit as frivolous, pointing out its lack of merit. Judges threw out key portions of the case, citing insufficient evidence. Langley's credibility plummeted further, leaving him isolated and vulnerable. As the trial date approached, Bondi prepared for the fight of her life. She reviewed every piece of evidence, rehearsed her testimony, and braced herself for whatever Langley might throw at her. Despite the risks, she felt a strange sense of peace. This wasn't just about clearing her name anymore. It was about proving that the system could still work, that justice could triumph over corruption. She looked in the mirror one morning and smiled faintly. No matter what happened next, she had already won in one way. She had forced the truth into the open. On the other side, Langley's desperation turned to paranoia. He stopped sleeping, haunted by nightmares of prison cells and public disgrace. He second-guessed everyone around him, convinced that even his closest allies might betray him. His behavior became erratic, alienating the few supporters he had left. When federal agents arrived at his home with a search warrant, he barely reacted. As they combed through his belongings, confiscating computers, phones, and files, he sat motionless, on the couch staring at the floor. For the first time in years, Judge Richard Langley looked powerless. The final blow came when one of Langley's co-conspirators cracked under interrogation. Facing the prospect of a long prison sentence, the man agreed to cooperate with investigators. In exchange for leniency, he provided damning testimony, confirming Bondi's claims and implicating Langley in numerous crimes. The confession sealed Langley's fate. Federal prosecutors announced new charges including bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of power. The news spread quickly, igniting celebrations among Bondi's supporters and sending shockwaves through Langley's inner circle. Bondi watched the announcement on television, tears streaming down her face. After months of uncertainty, sacrifice, and fear, the moment she had fought so hard for was finally here. Justice wasn't perfect, and the road ahead would still be difficult, but for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to feel hope. Outside her window, the sun began to rise, casting golden light over the town. It was a new day, one filled with possibilities she hadn't dared to dream of before. The courtroom buzzed with anticipation as the trial against Judge Richard Langley began. It was a spectacle unlike anything the small town had ever seen. Reporters packed the benches, their cameras clicking incessantly. Citizens lined up outside, before dawn, hoping to secure a seat. For Pam Bondi, sitting in the front row, it was surreal. Months of sleepless nights, fear, and relentless determination had led to this moment. She glanced around the room, taking in the sea of faces, some curious, some angry, some supportive. Whatever the outcome, she knew this day would define her life. Langley looked different from the man who once commanded respect with his stern gaze and booming voice. His suit was immaculate, but his face betrayed weariness. Dark circles under his eyes hinted at sleepless nights, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his tie. He tried to project confidence, nodding at familiar faces in the crowd, but there was an unmistakable tension in his movements. Even his lawyers seemed uneasy, exchanging whispered conversations and flipping anxiously through stacks of papers. The air felt heavy, charged with the weight of what was about to unfold. The prosecution opened its case with a powerful statement. An assistant district attorney stood before the jury, laying out the mountain of evidence against Langley. They presented bank records showing suspicious transactions, emails detailing bribes, and testimony from witnesses brave enough to come forward. One by one, the pieces fell into place, painting a damning picture of corruption. When the clerk's documents were introduced as evidence, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The handwritten notes, "Make sure this one disappears," drew gasps from the audience. Langley shifted uncomfortably in his seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Bondi took the stand on the second day of the trial. Her appearance drew intense scrutiny. Reporters scribbled furiously, capturing every detail of her testimony. Under oath, she recounted how she first noticed irregularities in Langley's rulings. She described late-night investigations, the mounting evidence, and the escalating threats she faced. Her voice wavered at times, especially when discussing the toll it had taken on her family. Yet she remained composed, answering questions clearly and directly. When asked why she persisted despite the risks, she paused, then said simply, "Because it was the right thing to do." Langley's defense team fought back aggressively, attempting to discredit Bondi's character. They accused her of being reckless, vengeful, and overly ambitious. They questioned her methods, suggesting she fabricated evidence to further her career. At one point, a defense attorney leaned dramatically toward the jury and declared, "This is not a trial of facts, it's a witch hunt." The tactic might have worked in a less transparent case, but the volume and specificity of the evidence overwhelmed their arguments. Each attempt to undermine Bondi only highlighted the strength of her case. As the days passed, more witnesses came forward, corroborating Bondi's claims. A former bailiff testified about overhearing Langley discuss payouts with wealthy defendants. A local business owner admitted to paying bribes in exchange for favorable verdicts. Even Langley's own staff couldn't escape scrutiny. A court clerk confessed to shredding incriminating documents on his orders. With each revelation, Langley's facade crumbled further. By the end of the week, he looked like a shadow of his former self, slumped in his chair, staring blankly ahead. Outside the courthouse, public opinion continued to shift. Supporters of Bondi held daily vigils, holding signs that read, "Truth over power," and "Justice prevails." Critics of the investigation grew quieter, unable to counter the overwhelming proof of wrongdoing. Social media lit up with hashtags praising Bondi's courage, while calls for judicial reform echoed across the country. People began to see the trial not just as a reckoning for Langley, but as a broader indictment of systemic corruption. Journalists compared it to landmark cases that reshaped institutions, sparking debates about accountability and transparency. For Langley, the final blow came during closing arguments. The prosecutor delivered a fiery speech, reminding the jury of the stakes involved. "This isn't just about one man," he said, pacing slowly in front of the jurors. "It's about trust. The trust we place in our courts, our judges, our system. If we let corruption go unpunished, we betray that trust. We betray justice itself." The words resonated deeply, not just with the jury but with everyone in the room. When the prosecutor finished, the courtroom erupted in applause, quickly silenced by the judge's gavel. When it was time for the verdict, the atmosphere was electric. The gallery overflowed with spectators, many standing along the walls or sitting cross-legged on the floor. Langley sat rigidly, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. Bondi clasped her hands tightly in her lap, trying to steady her breathing. As the foreman stood to announce the decision, a hush fell over the room. "Guilty," he said firmly, reading each charge aloud. Gasps turned into cheers, though the judge quickly called for order. Langley's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing soundlessly. For the first time, he looked truly defeated. After the verdict, chaos erupted outside the courthouse. Supporters celebrated, chanting Bondi's name and waving flags. Opponents muttered bitterly, accusing the system of bias. Reporters shoved microphones toward anyone willing to comment. Amid the commotion, Bondi emerged quietly, flanked by Harris and her parents. She wore a faint smile, her eyes red from unshed tears. When a reporter asked how she felt, she hesitated, then replied, "Relieved, grateful, but most of all, hopeful. Hopeful that this will lead to real change." Langley, meanwhile, was escorted away in handcuffs, his head bowed. Cameras flashed as he climbed into a police van, disappearing behind tinted windows. His fall from grace was swift and brutal, a stark reminder of how quickly power can vanish when built on lies. Friends and allies abandoned him, distancing themselves publicly to avoid association. Once hailed as a pillar of justice, he now became a cautionary tale, a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked authority. In the weeks that followed, the impact of the trial rippled far beyond the town. Legislators introduced bills aimed at increasing oversight of judges and strengthening ethical standards. Bar associations hosted seminars on combating corruption, using Langley's case as a teaching tool. Across the country, citizens demanded similar reforms inspired by Bondi's bravery. Though progress was slow, the momentum was undeniable. People began to believe again that justice could prevail, even against seemingly insurmountable odds. For Bondi, life gradually returned to normal, or as close to normal as possible after such a monumental ordeal. Charges against her were dropped, clearing her name completely. She received offers from prestigious law firms and advocacy groups, eager to capitalize on her newfound fame. But Bondi declined them all, choosing instead to focus on grassroots efforts to improve the legal system. She traveled to schools and community centers, sharing her story and encouraging others to speak out against injustice. Courage isn't The absence of fear, she often said. It's doing what's right even when you're terrified. Though the scars of the battle remained, sleepless nights, lingering doubts, strained relationships, Bondi refused to dwell on the negatives. Instead, she focused on the future, determined to leave a legacy of integrity and hope. She knew the fight wasn't over. Corruption wouldn't disappear overnight. But for the first time in a long time, she believed real change was possible. And that belief gave her strength to keep moving forward, one step at a time. Months after Judge Richard Langley's conviction, the town began to heal, but scars remained. The courthouse, once a symbol of fairness and order, now carried an aura of shame. People walked past it with mixed feelings, anger at what had happened, relief that the truth had come out, and lingering distrust of those who worked within its walls. Pam Bondi felt this tension every time she entered the building. Though exonerated and celebrated as a hero, she couldn't shake the memories of how easily the system had turned against her. Each step inside reminded her of the fragility of a justice and the importance of protecting it. Langley's sentencing hearing was a somber affair. Dozens of victims testified about how his corrupt decisions had ruined their lives. A single mother recounted losing custody of her children because Langley ruled in favor of a wealthy ex-spouse who had bribed him. A small business owner described bankruptcy caused by a fraudulent lawsuit, Langley allowed to proceed unchecked. Their stories painted a heartbreaking picture of the human cost of his crimes. When it was Bondi's turn to speak, she stood calmly, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "This isn't just about punishing one man," she said. "It's about acknowledging the harm he caused and making sure no one else suffers like this again." The judge overseeing the case sentenced Langley to 20 years in prison without parole, calling his actions a betrayal of the highest order. As bailiffs led him away, Langley looked back briefly, his eyes meeting Bondi's. There was no hatred in his gaze, only emptiness. For all his power and influence, he had been reduced to nothing more than another inmate. His downfall served as a stark reminder that even those who wield authority are not above the law. With Langley behind bars, attention shifted to preventing similar abuses in the future. Bondi became a leading voice in the push for judicial reform. She partnered with lawmakers, advocacy groups, and legal experts to draft policies aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. One proposal required judges to disclose financial records regularly, ensuring they weren't accepting bribes or gifts. Another established independent oversight boards to investigate complaints against judges. These measures faced resistance from some corners, with critics arguing they would infringe on judicial independence. But Bondi countered passionately, emphasizing that accountability and integrity went hand in hand. Her efforts earned both praise and criticism. Supporters hailed her as a champion of justice, crediting her with sparking a national conversation about corruption in the legal system. Critics accused her of overreach, claiming she was using her newfound fame to impose unnecessary regulations. Bondi shrugged off the backlash, focusing instead on the bigger picture. She knew change wouldn't happen overnight, but she believed persistence would eventually pay off. "If we wait for perfect conditions, nothing will ever get done," she told a group of students during a speaking engagement. "Progress is messy, but it's worth fighting for." As Bondi traveled the country sharing her story, she met countless others who had faced injustice. Some were lawyers and judges frustrated by systemic flaws. Others were ordinary citizens whose lives had been upended by unfair rulings. Each encounter reinforced her commitment to the cause. She listened intently to their stories, taking notes and promising to amplify their voices. In return, they offered her strength and inspiration, reminding her she wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they formed a growing movement dedicated to restoring trust in the legal system. Despite her successes, Bondi struggled with personal challenges. The months of fear, isolation, and relentless pressure had taken a toll. She often woke up in the middle of the night, haunted by memories of threats and uncertainty. Her relationships suffered too. Friends and family worried about her well-being, urging her to slow down and take care of herself. At times, she considered stepping back, retreating to a quieter life. But then she'd think about the people counting on her, the ones who saw her as a beacon of hope, and she'd push forward, determined to keep going. Mark Harris remained a steadfast ally throughout this period. He continued reporting on cases of judicial misconduct, shining a light on issues others ignored. His articles kept the momentum alive, holding officials accountable and inspiring action. Together, he and Bondi collaborated on initiatives to educate the public about their rights and how to report wrongdoing. They also worked to support whistleblowers, providing resources and guidance to help them navigate the risks involved. Their partnership became a model of collaboration between journalism and activism, proving the power of combining forces for a common goal. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Langley's case spread far beyond the town. Other jurisdictions launched investigations into allegations of corruption, uncovering troubling patterns in their own courts. Judges under scrutiny resigned or were removed from office. Lawyers implicated in bribery schemes faced disciplinary action. The domino effect was undeniable and unsettling. It revealed how widespread the problem was, challenging assumptions about the integrity of the legal system. Yet it also demonstrated the potential for meaningful change when individuals dared to speak out. Back home, Bondi found solace in small victories. She attended ceremonies honoring whistleblowers and advocates, celebrating their courage and resilience. She joined community meetings where residents discussed ways to improve local governance, and she spent quiet evenings with her family, cherishing moments of peace after so much turmoil. These activities grounded her, reminding her why she had fought so hard in the first place, not for fame or recognition, but for fairness and justice. One day, while visiting a high school to talk about ethics and accountability, Bondi received a letter from an unexpected source. It was written by Langley, now serving his sentence in a federal penitentiary. In it, he expressed regret for his actions, though he stopped short of apologizing directly to her. "I let greed blind me," he wrote. "I thought I was untouchable, but I see now how wrong I was. You showed me the cost of my choices, not just for me, but for everyone affected by them." Bondi read the letter several times, her emotions shifting between anger, sadness, and pity. Ultimately, she decided to keep it, viewing it as a testament to the impact of her work. Though Langley's words offered little comfort to those he had harmed, they underscored a broader truth. Accountability matters. Whether through trials, reforms, or simple acts of courage, holding people responsible for their actions sends a powerful message. It reminds us that justice isn't just about punishing wrongdoers. It's about creating a world where fairness prevails. For Bondi, this belief became the foundation of everything she did moving forward. Years later, when historians looked back on the scandal, they credited Bondi with sparking a revolution in judicial ethics. Textbooks highlighted her role in exposing corruption and advocating for reform. Documentaries chronicled her journey, portraying her as both a symbol of resilience and a catalyst for change. Yet Bondi herself never sought recognition. She preferred to focus on the work ahead, knowing there was still much to be done. In the end, her legacy wasn't defined by headlines or accolades. It was measured by the lives she touched and the systems she helped transform. Through sheer determination and unwavering moral clarity, Pam Bondi proved that even in the darkest moments, justice could prevail. And for anyone doubting whether one person could make a difference, her story stood as proof that courage and conviction could indeed change the world. Years passed, and the story of Pam Bondi's fight against Judge Richard Langley became more than just a tale of corruption. It became a lesson. In classrooms, teachers used her case to teach students about integrity, accountability, and the importance of standing up for what is right. In courtrooms, judges reminded themselves of the consequences of abusing power. And in communities across the nation, ordinary people drew inspiration from Bondi's courage, realizing that even when faced with overwhelming odds, one voice could spark change. For Bondi, life settled into a rhythm of advocacy and reflection. She continued traveling, speaking at conferences and meeting with lawmakers to push for reforms. Her name carried weight now, and doors that once slammed shut opened willingly. Yet, despite her growing influence, she remained humble. She refused to let fame define her, choosing instead to focus on the work itself. "This isn't about me," she often said. "It's about making sure no one has to go through what I did, or worse." Her efforts bore fruit slowly but steadily. New laws were enacted to increase transparency in the judiciary, requiring judges to undergo regular ethics training and submit detailed financial disclosures. Independent oversight committees sprang up in cities and states, giving citizens a way to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. These changes weren't perfect. They didn't eliminate corruption entirely, but they created safeguards that made it harder for bad actors to operate unchecked. For Bondi, these incremental victories were enough. She knew progress was rarely immediate or flashy. It was built brick by brick, decision by decision. As time went on, Bondi found joy in mentoring younger generations. Law students sought her advice, eager to learn from someone who had walked the line between idealism and reality. She encouraged them to stay curious, to ask questions, and to trust their instincts. "Don't be afraid to challenge the status quo," she told them during a lecture at a university. "The law exists to serve people, not the other way around. If something feels wrong, it probably is." Her words resonated deeply, planting seeds of determination in minds ready to make a difference. But Bondi's journey wasn't all triumphs and applause. There were setbacks too. Some of her proposals stalled in legislative committees, blocked by politicians resistant to change. Critics accused her of being too ambitious, claiming her ideas would create unnecessary bureaucracy. Others dismissed her as naive, arguing that human nature couldn't be regulated. Bondi listened to their arguments, sometimes agreeing with parts of them, but she never wavered in her belief that improvement was possible. "If we give up because it's hard, then we've already lost," she said during a heated debate. "We owe it to future generations to try." Langley's fate served as a constant reminder of why trying mattered. In prison, he faded into obscurity, his name occasionally mentioned in news articles about judicial scandals. He spent his days reading books and writing letters, attempting to make sense of his downfall. Though he claimed to regret his actions, many doubted the sincerity of his remorse. To some, his imprisonment was justice served. To others, it was a cautionary tale about hubris and greed. Either way, his legacy stood as proof that power unchecked led to ruin. Bondi visited him once, years after the trial. It was an impulsive decision, driven by curiosity rather than forgiveness. Sitting across from him in a sterile visiting room, she studied the man who had tried to destroy her. His hair had grayed, and lines etched deep into his face. When she asked why he had done it, why he had risked everything for money and influence, he shrugged. "I thought I deserved it," he admitted quietly. "I worked hard, played by the rules at least most of the time, and I convinced myself I was entitled to more. I was wrong." Bondi nodded, absorbing his words. She didn't feel anger anymore, just sadness. For him, for the lives he damaged, and for the system that allowed such abuse to flourish. Afterward, Bondi returned to her work with renewed purpose. She realized that while individuals like Langley could wreak havoc, the real enemy was complacency. Corruption thrived when good people stayed silent, assuming someone else would take care of it. That realization fueled her commitment to empowering others. She started hosting workshops for whistleblowers, teaching them how to document evidence and protect themselves legally. She collaborated with tech companies to develop tools that made reporting easier and safer, and she partnered with schools to integrate lessons about civic responsibility into curriculums, hoping to instill values of fairness and accountability early on. Her personal life also evolved. The strain of her battle against Langley had tested her relationships, but time healed many wounds. Her parents, though still protective, expressed pride in what she had accomplished. Friends who had distanced themselves during the darkest days reached out, apologizing and offering support. Even her siblings, initially skeptical of her crusade, came around, attending events and cheering her on. Bondi cherished these moments, grateful for the love and understanding that surrounded her. One evening, as she sat on her porch watching the sunset, Bondi reflected on how far she'd come. From a young prosecutor questioning suspicious rulings to a national figure advocating for systemic change, her journey had been anything but predictable. She smiled faintly, thinking about the twists and turns, the sleepless nights, the threats, the victories, and the losses. None of it had been easy, but none of it had been wasted either. Every step had shaped her into the person she was today, resilient, compassionate, and unafraid to stand up for justice. The next morning, Bondi woke, early, ready to tackle another day. A local newspaper had invited her to speak at a community forum about rebuilding trust in institutions. As she prepared her notes, she thought about the people she'd meet, some hopeful, some cynical, all searching for answers. She knew not. Everyone would agree with her views, and that was okay. What mattered was starting conversations, planting seeds of possibility. If even one person left feeling inspired to act, it would be worth it. At the forum, Bondi spoke passionately, weaving personal anecdotes with practical advice. She emphasized the importance of staying vigilant, of questioning authority, and of holding leaders accountable. Justice isn't something you wait for, it's something you create, she said, her voice steady and strong. The audience listened intently, nodding along as she painted a vision of a fairer, more transparent world. Afterward, dozens approached her, thanking her for her insights and sharing their own stories. One teenager lingered behind, asking shyly if she thought ordinary people could really make a difference. Bondi smiled warmly. "Absolutely," she replied. "In fact, ordinary people are the only ones who can." As the years rolled on, Bondi's impact grew beyond what anyone could have imagined. Cities named awards after her, honoring individuals who demonstrated exceptional bravery in fighting corruption. Universities established scholarships in her name, supporting students pursuing careers in public service. Documentaries and books chronicled her journey, ensuring her story would endure long after she was gone. But for Bondi, the greatest reward was knowing she had helped shift the conversation. People no longer accepted injustice as inevitable. They demanded better and believed they could achieve it. In the end, Pam Bondi's legacy wasn't defined by titles or trophies. It was measured by the ripples she created. Her courage inspired countless others to speak out, to question, and to act. Her persistence reminded the world that even the smallest voices could echo loudly when united by purpose. And her unwavering belief in justice proved that truth, though fragile, was worth defending at any cost.